About that momentarily. And then in the second half, filmmaker Mina Chow. And she is an adjunct professor of architecture at USC turned filmmaker. And she's got a terrific film called Face of a Nation about the history and evolution or devolution of the world's fairs. It's a fascinating film. And that's coming up in the second half. We're going to actually segue into another great woman artist, not only an architect and a professor, an adjunct professor at USC, but turned filmmaker. And she's got a great film called Face of a Nation about the world fairs. And it's an amazing film. So we're going to play a little bit of Simon and Garfunkel, So Long Frank Lloyd Wright. And we'll be back with Mina Chow. And that, of course, is the great Simon and Garfunkel. What a terrific song that is, So Long Frank Lloyd Wright. And it's been given new meaning to me, having seen it as part of the film of Mina Chow, Face of a Nation. Welcome, Mina, first of all. And Mina is an adjunct associate professor at USC School of Architecture, and now she has turned filmmaker. What prompted you to do that, and what prompted you to do this wonderful film about the world's fairs?
First of all, I want to thank you, Donna, for having me on your show, because it's so critical to, be able to talk about some of these issues that I like to talk about. So what prompted me to become a filmmaker? I always loved films, as most of, I'm sure your listeners do as well, because they really do speak to people in ways that are so immersive when you're in that dark room and you're able to really feel like you're part of something and you're involved in the story. So I have always enjoyed filmmaking on that level, but one of the things I noticed was that what I cared about in architecture just didn't seem to relate, or maybe we weren't doing such a great job explaining the power of what we do and how it can influence perception and how can also influence how we feel. And so to me, I thought that I needed to learn how to communicate the effectiveness of architecture in a way that could connect to people, because architecture is a silent space that doesn't really speak, and so maybe I needed to actually speak for architecture.
Well, I did want to mention something because you and I met, and I'm struggling with trying not to sneeze here. I apologize.
Allergy season.
She's looking at me while I'm making all these funny faces, but we had actually met at the German Currents Film Festival. I remember it vividly. And speaking of women and networking, and we had a chance to chat, and you said, I've done this film, and have been in touch with me ever since, every time there was a screening. And for one reason or another, I could never make it, but I made it this week, and I'm so happy I did, because this film, obviously you bring to it an architect sensibility. It's visually great, and obviously the archival footage of the World's Fairs over the decades, and the history and importance of the World's Fairs, and kind of what it's devolved to, at least in terms of the U.S. participation in the World's Fairs, which is non-existent pretty much. But you've got great archival footage in this film, and chronologically we see how this became from a global, highlight of countries and innovation and creativity. And I mean, Buckminster Fuller and his geodesic dome, and the great architecture in Montreal, and the Space Needle. So you go through that,
yes,
to where we've come now. And there's kind of a linchpin in it, the U.S. Information Agency. So let's we've got very little time, I'm so sorry to say, but talk about your process of piecing together this film chronologically, as you are a child of Chinese immigrants, correct?
Yes.
So you interweave all these stories together. What was your game plan, and how did you go about doing that?
We didn't have a game plan when we started.
Filmmakers rarely do.
This story was found in the process of my losing my dream as an architect. And I found out about World Fairs when I was in China making a movie for USC. And I saw a poster, and I really wanted to go the following year. And I didn't really know why. I just knew I wanted to go. So I raised $40,000 and basically got this team of amazing professionals together, including somebody we just lost on Sunday, Professor Norman Holland, who started the movie with me. And I am so indebted to him because he helped me find story. So we went as a small crew of 4 people and a bunch of students, and we shot at the Shanghai World Expo in 2010. And I was completely devastated, not knowing I was devastated, but really shocked by what I saw. And it was so bad that I obviously was impelled to do some more research. And I went into the library, and I came back to LA after that trip, and I went into the library, and I found this book called Cold War Confrontations, the United States Information Agency. And I saw that there was a phone number in the back of the book, and I called up the person on the back of the book, and it was Jack Macy, who is the hero in our film.
He is.
He's my Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Mm-hmm.
We actually I thought about this film the way that you would think about Star Wars, and I am Luke Skywalker, struggling to keep my dream alive. This is what Norm did. It's like I think about stories so much. Because in a way, what I noticed was that I didn't think that architects were necessarily talking about the issues the way that people they don't understand the importance of what we do, and we relate to human beings, and architecture speaks to human beings, but it can be so subtle and so subliminal. So I had to figure out a way of connecting to people through film story. So that's how it started, and from that moment, I basically started to research, and I was lucky to get access to the Macy Archives, which is now the director of the Macy Archives, Beverly P.F. Macy. She's an amazing woman, and between she and Jack, they literally started explaining this really complicated and complex history that I had no clue, and no American would know this because USIA was about sending messages about America to the world internationally. It wasn't about, we always use this word propaganda, and we think of it in a bad way. Most people don't know about USIA because it was the job of USIA was to connect to the people of the world and send messages about what America was truly about, the values of what we are about. And what we show in the movie is we show the loss of representation of the American people when we defund and then eliminate the agency that is responsible for showing the best of American culture. And it's so critical for us to be, it's a political issue in the sense that it's bigger than the sort of partisanship that we've been seeing a lot of. This is about defunding something that we don't seem to have a voice anymore as the American people. What's happened is corporations have become the voice of our country because they pay for it. So, what we are trying to show is that when we do participate, you're actually getting the biggest bang for the buck when you do it well and you use good design, excellence in design. But when you do it poorly, like the way we've been doing for the last 25 years, unfortunately, the bang is shooting ourselves in the foot.
Well, and, as talking about USIA, a lot of the promotion of the World's Fair, as you mentioned, was kind of an outgrowth of the Cold War. But it also spurred us, that competition with the Russians spurred us to, of course, landing on the moon, all these. And one of the segments at the Japanese World's Fair.
The Osaka
World's Fair, the moon rocks are there. And basically, what starts to happen is our government decides to not fund our participation. And what ends up happening, as you mentioned, is the corporations move in. And even they aren't very excited about it because it's not profitable for them. But what we start to see in the film is what used to be these glorious buildings, this glorious architecture, has kind of become a black box that people are herded into. In fact, one of the people in the film even mentions we've captured them for 45 minutes, shown them these inane videos, and walls plastered with American corporate logos. And it's just, you see that it's a crisis of American identity as well as a devolution of our participation in the World's Fair.
Yeah, and I think it's because I am a daughter of immigrants that I've always been aware of this idea of identity, because I've always struggled with what is the best of my identity as a Chinese American woman. So for me, it wasn't difficult for me to start to see that we've lost sight of who we are, and we've lost sight of our American values, which I think are rooted in the fact of our diversity. And rather than, we're creating this sort of divisive identity politics, when reality, what is important to me, and I really want to emphasize this, is that, we have all these labels, and it's actually human to label things because it's how we used to survive with the primitive brain. But, for me, it's not. What we've lost sight of is the connection of real space, real interaction, face-to-face, personal communication, and meeting each other. And rather than focusing on labels of whether or not you're liberal, conservative, one of the things we all have in common is that we all have the best interests of the nation.
Right. We have to wrap it up, and I'm so sorry, but I have to mention that there is a screening coming up on April 7th in Ventura County at the Ventura County Museum.
Yes, it's a free screening, too.
And we do have listeners up there in the Ventura area, so I want to urge everybody to get out. And it's worth the trip up there to see this film. You'll be there, I'm sure, for Q&As and stuff. So again, the film is Face of a Nation. The filmmaker is Mina Chow. I highly recommend it. Hopefully we'll be seeing it one of these days in a festival or on PBS or maybe even at the Oscars, I hope. But in the meantime, get up to the Ventura County Museum for this great film, Face of a Nation. And I want to thank you, Mina. I can't say enough about this film. It's about so many things. Architecture, innovation, creativity, politics, corporations. So if you can, get up there to Ventura to see it. We're going to go out with Working on a Building. And I want to thank our listeners again for your pledges. We'll see you next week, and stay tuned for the Pocho Hour of Power.
working on a building. I'm working on a building. I'm working on a building for my Lord, for my Lord. It's the Holy Ghost building.